Welcome to the session about risk assessment. Risk assessment is the foundation of all of our management, whether it's financial, health, safety, environmental, strategic. Risk assessment is the process where we try and foresee things that may happen that will impact on our goals, our objectives, what we want to achieve. We have realized that many people are confused about some of the concepts in risk assessment, and that the quality of risk assessments as the foundation for risk assessment is not as strong as it needs to be, and therefore we've compiled this training session on risk assessment. The first section will cover the principles, the terms and definitions that we will be using in risk assessment. Now, risk assessment can be quite a complex field, and there are people that study for 4 years at university to get risk assessment and all the concepts and principles down. Now, we have condensed this into a short session, and we are focusing our risk assessment efforts specifically on health, safety, and environmental issues. Why do we do risk assessment? Well, we want to keep all people affected by your operations. That includes your employees, any end users, customers, visitors to your sites and to your facilities, and neighbors, safe from harm. Now, harm is any injury, disease, reputational loss, something that you lose that you don't want to lose. And it's a key responsibility under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. How do we keep people safe from harm? Well, firstly, you need to identify all the dangers in your operations and in your surroundings. You need to understand how they may hurt people or cause them to get sick, and then you have to take actions to prevent these possibilities of injury and sickness from becoming a reality. Now, that whole process is called hazard identification, risk assessment, and control. How does this fit into my organization, you would ask? Why would I need to do this in my company? My company is small, I can't afford all of these issues. Why would I do risk assessments and go to this effort? Well, firstly, the Occupational Health and Safety Act says that the employer has a duty to provide safe systems of work, to identify all the hazards, to put means into place that will prevent these dangers, these hazards, from making people sick or injuring them. You must train your people and in your organization, and you must enable them to apply these controls so that they do not inadvertently hurt themselves. So people have to be informed, and you have to enable them to protect themselves and others. So that's the first key responsibility of an employer. Employees also have a duty in that they have to follow the rules of the employer, and they may not prevent the employer from following or executing and obeying his duty as we've just outlined as the duty of the employer. And also, if you are self-employed, you are under a similar obligation to keep yourself and others safe from harm. So, the first thing is that there's a legal requirement by the Occupational or through the Occupational Health and Safety Act to keep yourself, whether you are employed or self-employed, your employees and other people, you have to prevent them from getting hurt. And that means you have to identify the dangers, you have to analyze those dangers, you have to tell other people about these possible dangers to them and others. You have to put controls in place so that those dangers don't get out of hand, and you have to enable other people to identify them and to control and keep themselves safe. These duties are spelled out in the Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1993 in Section 8, Section 9, Section 10, and Section 14. Now, I'm not going to repeat that. You must please go and read that up in your legislation. I will have copies of the OSH Act online in the Google Classroom for you to read, but this is not a legal compliance session, so please go and read what this says. Secondly, apart from your legal obligation, you have a moral obligation to keep people safe. When we operate and when we have a business, we have a moral obligation to work to improve others' situation rather than exploit them. You don't want to exploit people because they are desperate for any work, and now what you do is you give them work that may kill them or that may make them sick, or you take shortcuts, you don't provide them with the right PPE, you don't train them, and then when they get hurt, then you just say, well, this was their own fault, they didn't follow the rules and procedures. So, firstly, you have an obligation in your community to work not only for your self-improvement, but also for the benefit of others. Another moral obligation is that when you inform people, when you employ them, don't lie to them. Don't withhold information. So if you provide false information, you send them into a job or you let them do certain things and you don't inform them how they can get harmed, or you provide them false information, you are lying and you are exploiting people for your own financial benefit, and that is immoral. Sometimes employers abuse power. People come and they complain and they tell you about dangerous things, they tell you about things that are not right in the company, and then you abuse your power. You either hide it from your more senior supervisors, or you say, well, you just go back to work or you don't work here anymore. Or you slowly through constructive dismissal, you make life difficult for this employee. When he needs time off, you refuse that. You give other preferential treatment versus him. That is an abuse of power, and that's also a form of exploitation. So letting people work for you under dangerous conditions, and when they complain and they want to have this corrected, if you abuse your power, you are acting immorally. It's also immoral. There's nothing wrong with running a business. There's nothing wrong with earning money. But if you exploit other people's health and you put their lives in danger to make money for you while you are sitting safe and comfortably, that is also immoral. So we don't want to engage in that kind of behavior in our business. Lastly, if you don't fully understand what this whole moral thing is, put yourself in other people's shoes and ask yourself if you, your wife, or your children, or any other of your relatives have to go and work under similar circumstances where their life and their health is in danger just to provide for their families, how would you feel if you knew what the circumstances were. I'm sure that you will not be happy, you would not be great, and you would probably try and do something about this. So, from a moral point of view, there's a lot of reasons, there are a lot of reasons why we want to keep our workplace safe and healthy to work in. Now, apart from the legal obligation that you have, which some people will shrug off, or even the moral obligation, which some people will shrug off, good risk management is good business. The whole idea of risk management is that what we do is we will sit and we will think about what we're doing, where we are doing this, and we will have an idea of our objectives. And those objectives might be to grow the company, to deliver certain products, to sell at a certain price, to make a certain profit, and eventually to grow as a company and grow financially and so on. But if I'm not careful and I don't consider nicely what's happening, I will get surprises. I will get injuries, I will get accidents, things will get stolen, I will get job interruptions, and I will not be able to deliver on the objectives as I have set them at the beginning. So the first positive thing that comes out of risk assessment from a good business point of view is that you can see the surprises and you can make informed decisions about how you will handle, either prevent or mitigate those surprises. So informed decision making is a benefit, reducing your surprises in the future. Secondly, if you can manage your business in a consistent way and you don't have these unplanned events that are happening, surprises in delivery, in injuries, in quality, all of those things, you will develop a reputation in the business world that will earn you more business. You'll develop a good relationship with possible clients and current clients about how you do business, so your reputation will improve. Have a lot of injuries, exploit people, rip people off, hurt people, make them sick, you will get a bad reputation and people will not want to do business with you because they don't want to be associated with similar behavior, or you will eventually go down the drain because people will not want to work for you because it's too dangerous. It's not worth the income that you are paying. And maybe even government, the Department of Labor will shut you down because you are putting people's lives in danger. One accident, if you don't have the right protection in place in terms of risk management systems and insurance and those kind of things, can shut your business down. They can give you a fine, they can prevent you from doing business. Your clients may just leave you high and dry because they don't want to be associated with you. So, reputation-wise, risk management is a good thing. Third reason, you guys are registered, all companies have to register with the COID or with a workman's compensation. If you have injuries, those premiums will go up, will cost you more money. You will have business interruptions. You'll have to pay medical costs. If a person gets injured and they have to go to hospital and it's a serious injury, intensive care and medical care is extremely expensive. And you may not have that money, and a person may then he may sue you on a civil basis and recover those costs from you in future. And that may bankrupt you. Lastly, good risk management helps you to retain business. It's linked to reputation. If you do good risk management and you can show people that you're doing good risk management and people know that you will not get any surprises, and therefore they will not get any surprises in the future. They would like to do business with you, and they will keep business with you. But don't manage your risks, and people will walk away with you, and eventually you'll not be able to do business because you'll get known as an unsafe employer or a company. What you see up here is a model for a health and safety management system. Currently, a lot of contractors, a lot of emerging companies only have what we call a SHE file or a contractor's file. Now, there's a lot of documentation in there that the employer or the customer wants you to have, and they want you to have that information. They want you to show that information so that they can get an impression of how well you are managing your risks. However, when we look at the quality of these files, we find that it's often just a lot of paper. There's no substance to it, it's not working, and it's not really built on knowledge. What we need to do if we want to really manage out the surprises in our business in terms of health and safety, we have to follow this model. What we really have to do to manage out the surprises in our business is we need to implement this model for a health and safety management system. Now that starts firstly by somebody making a decision in the company, the top dogs, and they say, we are going to run this company in a way that people are safe, they don't get injured, and that they don't get sick, all right? So that's the policy. We'll talk about policy in other training sessions. I'm not going to elaborate about this. The second part and the foundation of your health and safety management system is planning. Now, there are two areas that I need to consider for planning. The first one are my legal requirements. There is a lot of legislation that prescribes how I need to do certain things. I need to identify them, and I need to apply the minimum prescription of that legislation. We're not going to talk about that in this training session. We'll get to it a little bit later. But there are a lot of requirements in the construction regulations, the ergonomic regulations, the hazardous chemical substances regulations, and so on, that you need to conform with. So you need to identify that legislation, because if you don't and you don't comply to it, you're acting illegally, and once again, your clients may choose not to do business with you. Should something happen, you are liable for major compensation, and Department of Labor can come and shut you down. Also, you are not obliging with your moral obligation, and you are exposing people to injury and to sickness. The second part of planning is what we are going to discuss in this training material, and that is hazard identification. The second and very important part of planning is to identify all the hazards and the risks to your organization, so that you can then go to the next stage, which is implement controls. And those controls will include things like appointing people, allocating money, allocating responsibility, training people for competence, making them aware of certain things. We are also going to implement communication processes, participation processes. We are going to put certain documentation in place, operating procedures, rules, regulations, forms, guidelines, signs and signals, and all that kind of stuff. We are also going to control documents, which we have already done a training session about, making sure that you control the documents, that people have the documents that they require and they are up to date. We are keeping records of what we've done so that we can prove that we've done certain things and analyze them. We are going to apply operational control, which means discipline in the workplace. It doesn't help we have a lot of rules and regulations and guidelines to keep people safe and then people don't follow the rules. And lastly, because we are human and because we cannot plan for everything and mistakes do happen, we are going to mitigate the risks. In other words, should something happen, we want to have emergency preparedness and response so that we can stop fires, explosions, we can stop the escalation of injury so that they don't become worse. We are also going to implement a checking processes, inspections, audits, and so on, to make sure that what we've planned, that we've got good plans in place, and that our implementation is going according to plan. We're going to check, and then from time to time we are going to see where we can improve, and we're going to follow a path of improvement. What I want to stress is that none of this that follows here can happen if you don't have a good planning process in place. If you don't plan for things, you will get surprised somewhere along the chain, and that will cost you. So this is the key. Doing good hazard identification, risk assessment, and control is the key for a good health and safety management system. This brings us to the question, when do we do risk assessment? Well, informally, we are doing risk assessments all the time. Whether you sit, whether you stand, whether you walk, if you want to cross the road, if you want to hitchhike somewhere, if you want to climb onto something, if you want to climb up and down steps, eating something, not eating something, driving, all the time we are doing risk assessments. We are always asking, is there something that can hurt me? What are the chances that it may happen, and how bad will it be? And if that risk, the combination of the likelihood of an event, in other words, chance of something going wrong and the severity of that event, if that is high enough, if that's bad enough, then what we will do is we will take action so that either the event doesn't happen, or that if it happens, then the consequences are not so bad. So we are actually doing risk assessments continuously, informally. Formally, we need to do risk assessment before we start any business, before we start any project, when we are working in an area on a daily basis, before we do a task, whenever we use machinery, whenever we use chemicals. There are many ways in which we can do risk assessments, different kinds of tools. Some of them are very specific for working at height, for instance, for working with chemicals, for confined space entry, what more, for isolating equipment. So there are many kinds of risk assessments, some of them with checklists that you can follow with questions. Other are more free form, and they are looking at wider approaches. We are only going to look at one kind of risk assessment. Well, not one. We're going to use a tool which we call hazard identification, risk assessment, and control, and we are going to do it with an overview to our total business. So your whole business, or a workshop, a construction site, we are going to have let's call it a helicopter view, a very high level overview of our whole business and our activities, and we are going to do a general risk assessment. In South Africa, that is called a baseline risk assessment. In the rest of the world, it's called a general risk assessment or an initial risk assessment. And like I said, it's very high level, and the idea is to get an overall view of all the hazards that are under your control and in your activity. Later on, what we will do is we will rate and evaluate these hazards, and we will give them scores, risk rating scores, that will lift out the very dangerous hazards from the harmless, or the almost harmless hazards, so that we can focus much of our management effort on the high risk hazards, and we don't bother about the small issues that we can actually tolerate. We'll talk about all of those things during this risk assessment training course. If I do a good general risk assessment, I will also have a very good source of information once I start doing specialized, focused risk assessments like hazardous chemicals or task safety analysis before I tackle certain tasks. So we want to list all the hazards so that we have that information. We can decide which ones needs the most attention, which ones I don't have to bother about, and we can use good information for our future sessions. Like I said, there are several methods. There are more than 50 methods of doing risk assessments. Some of them look very widely, and they are used like we will do the initial risk baseline, the initial risk assessment. You use them to filter out the important stuff from the less important stuff. And then what we can do is we can use more focused methods that are typically more time and resource intensive. We can apply those to a smaller amount of hazards. An example would be hazardous chemicals. If I take all my hazardous chemicals according to the 9 classes and I analyze them, then I will be able to lift out all the really toxic, the flammable and explosive ones, and I will be able to analyze them in detail, and all the stuff that are not that harmful, I can say, well, those are not harmful, we apply a minimum control and we will be safe against them. This picture of a construction site illustrates what I mean with the whole area. If I want to do a general and a baseline risk assessment for this site, I literally start in the one corner and I say, what do I see? I see a cement mixer. I see barriers. I see some rubble. I see some reinforcing. I see excavator 1. I see excavator 2, 3, 4. I see something here. That's probably a site office or a control office. I see an articulated dump truck. I see dust. I see, looks like a pile driver. I see a massive crane. I see barricading. I see a compressor. All of these things that I see here, I need to list as part of my initial risk assessment. I will go into detail later on excavations and on confined space entries and trenches and dust and those things. But for now, I need to get an overall view of all the hazards that are lurking in the area where I will be working. That is what we will be doing with our initial risk assessment. In our initial risk assessment, we have to list every hazard. In this picture, you see there's a variety of tools. A file, a bench, vise, spanner, screwdriver, a tape measure, a hacksaw with a blade, a G lamp, hammers. Every one of those tools can hurt you in a slightly different way when you are using it. Some of them can cut you. Some of them can cause bruises. Some of them will, if you carry the vise, it's nice and heavy, can break your foot if it falls on you. Some of them will cause hit knuckles. It will take the skin off when you're working it. If you work with a screwdriver, for instance, in your hand and it slips, you can really, really hurt your hand, and that will take you out of commission. It can even disable you, it can destroy some of the nerves in your hand so that you can never have a good working hand again. What we need to do is we need to understand each one of these as an individual tool, and we need to develop skills to be able to work with those tools properly. And that's why when you start learning how to use tools, people will tell you the skills, but they will also tell you, if you don't apply the skills correctly, how this will hurt you. Now, that is a general risk assessment. We also use chemicals on our sites, or we are working in facilities where there are many of these chemicals. There are 9 classes of chemicals. Some of them are harmless, relatively harmless. Some of them are really dangerous. What we need to do is we need to identify all of them, and we need to separate them into their different classes so that we can handle them in the way that they need to be handled. I don't handle a horse and a lion and a donkey in exactly the same way. And that's what we are going to be working on when we look at tools and hazardous chemicals. I just want to quickly highlight this to you. There are 2 main categories of risk assessments. We call it qualitative and quantitative risk assessments. You don't have to bother about the difference between those two, right? For this course, in this course, we are going to use qualitative risk assessments. In other words, we are going to use our experience and we are going to make a personal judgment like low, medium, and high, or a 1 to 5 scale or something. A quantitative risk assessment is where they look at probabilities, and let's say for the insurance purposes, they have a huge database of the number of people that die, at what age they die, and they've got their lifestyles, their family history. Did they smoke? Did they parachute jump? Did they suffer from certain diseases? Did their parents die from certain diseases? What jobs are they working on? And they put this in a database, and they can statistically tell you that, my friend, in your family, with your circumstances, you have a 90% chance of actually dying at 65 or round about there, unless you change something. That is a quantitative risk assessment. Quantity, quantitative, you use numbers to be able to do this. Don't worry about that one for now. We are going to be using a qualitative risk assessment method. Hazard identification essentially means that what we want to do is we want to find all these things that may hurt us. We want to be able to understand them. We want to be able to assess them. So I must be able to look at this thing and say, how dangerous is this? How will it hurt me? What are the chances of this thing coming loose or something happening with it and that it will impact me? And when it does, how will it hurt me? Will it go in my eye? Will it go in my nose? Will it go in my mouth? Will it cut me? Will it burn me? Will it explode? So I need to be able to assess this. I need to form an idea. I need to judge this thing. So I need to understand this. Once I understand this, I can decide what I want to do with this. Am I going to manage it? Am I going to fight it? Am I going to run away? What am I going to do with this? Or am I going to fix this? So essentially, hazard identification is finding the hazard, judging this hazard in terms of what can it do to me, what can it do to others, what is the likelihood, what are the chances of this happening, and if it does happen, how bad will it be? Then I can decide if I want to live with these consequences or if I really want to do something about it, and I can then fix it so that it doesn't hurt me or somebody else. If we look at this picture, you will see that one of the big problems of hazards is that we first need to find it. We first need to see this. In this picture, can you guys see the snake? The snake is camouflaged. It's hiding right in front of us. It's not if it's hiding behind a tree or something. It's right here in front of us. For those of you that can't see it yet, here it is. You see the body? All the way here and all the way there's the head. Right? There you go. Now the challenge is, if you don't see the snake, if you don't see this thing, you will not be able to say, whoa, this snake is dangerous. I will not be able to look to find its characteristics, and I will not be able to classify the snake, whether it's a dangerous snake or a non-dangerous snake. Some people find all snakes dangerous because when they see them, they jump so high. When they come back from how they have jumped, they break their legs. So that makes snakes dangerous to all of them. Just a joke by the side. Okay, so what is the process that we use when we want to do risk assessment, risk management? Well, it starts with what we call communication and consultation. I need to involve my employees. I need to get them, they will be part of the process. And once I've identified the hazards, well, the part of the process is the community and my colleagues and employees and other people can share information with me. They can tell me, they can point out hazards to me that I myself am not familiar with or that I haven't been able to identify. So somebody will be able to tell me, watch out, don't step here, there's a snake here. Oh, I didn't see that. So that's the benefit. Also, I need to tell them after the risk assessment what are the things that we have found that are hazardous to them and what they should do. So communication and consultation here is a very important process. The first thing that we need, I'll get to the monitoring and review a little bit later. Once I've got a group of people together to do the risk assessment and I tell them what we're going to do, we need to establish the context. We'll talk about what context is, but this is basically where you identify the work, the scope of work, the area that you're going to work in, why you are there. So it gives you the background and the environment in which you are working in. The first thing that we need to do is we need to identify the hazards, and we need to ask ourselves, what is the character of this hazard and what danger does it pose to me and the other parties? When I say me, I include my employees, other people, and the neighbors in future, just for clarity. Now, once I have identified the risk, I need to analyze it, and we will say, what is the likelihood of this happening? What are the chances of it happening? And how bad will it be? And we will give it a risk score in the risk evaluation part. We will give it a score from 1 to 25 or from 1 to 6, whatever the case might be, so that we can filter out the high potential issues, the high consequence issues and hazards, and we can manage them first because we have limited resources, and then we'll decide how we treat them. Once we treat these risks, once I implement risk controls, I wear the PPE, I do the procedures, the checklists and all of those things, I need to go back from time to time and I need to see, have people taken this information and are they using this information and the rules and regulations to keep themselves safe? We will track the number of incidents, we will do inspections, we'll do near-miss reporting, all of those things, and we will review whether our plans and our treatment is actually working. And if it's not working, then of course we need to fix this. Why do we need to involve employees? Well, employees and people working in those areas are the ones that are most familiar with the conditions in that area. They will tell you what's happening and they might be able to point out hazards to you. Risk assessments are also learning opportunities and teaching opportunities. So people that join will see things maybe that they haven't seen before. When I'm leading risk assessments, I'm always seeing things that I wasn't aware before. When we start talking about how these hazards may harm us, then people also learn, and it makes them more aware of why they need to manage these things and how they need to treat hazards and control them. You also need to maintain attendance registers for your risk assessment sessions, because you need to demonstrate sometime in the future, should something happen, that people have been informed about the risks and they have participated. It's a legal requirement as well. So when you do risk assessments in group formats, employ and engage your employees and other parties and keep those maintenance registers.